There is no doubt that a welcomed, loved child is a gift. Indeed, a welcomed pregnancy is a blessing to a joyful family. Yet, not every pregnancy is welcomed. Not every family is supportive, nor every home joyful. For today's sermon, please do not confuse unplanned or unintended with unwelcome. Something can be unplanned and unintended and still welcome. Without jobs that are supportive of families, paying living wages and benefits, without childcare, preschool, education expenses, affordable quality housing, and systems of care, the word choice is really a misnomer. Can anyone actually be exercising choice if they don't have options? I thought abortion was about a woman's choice to carry a pregnancy to term. And now I realize it is about a system conspiring against people with uteruses and thus limiting choices. Reverend Rob Keithan prepared a guide for those of us organizing on abortion, justice, and reproductive rights. And he reminds us that the end goal of organizing for reproductive health is not that every person has the same view on abortion. The dominant culture framework consciously and unconsciously encourages us to think that only two options exist, for or against. Public opinion polling reinforces that. The more relevant question is, who should decide? Respect for body autonomy is a core principle of reproductive justice, as well as our UU OWL, Our Whole Lives curriculum. Reproductive freedom, religious freedom is a core principle of American democracy. And like I said, every few years at GA, we pass another proclamation because we trust people. The goal is not that everyone feels the same way. The goal is that everyone has access and support for what they need. So I'll be telling you stories today about when I was a chaplain at our state's largest Planned Parenthood clinic, the largest clinic offering abortion, and weave your stories into this. I have changed the details and names of everyone to protect identity. Even the people who told me I could shout their names from the pulpit. I used to imagine that abortions happened all the time in clinics and hospitals across the land. And then I came to learn that in Wisconsin, we have just 3 places where you can access an abortion. 2 are in Milwaukee and 1 is in Madison. 2 are run by Planned Parenthood. It is not that abortion takes special equipment only found in clinics and hospitals. It does not. The procedure is the same as a D&C, a clearing of the uterine lining after a miscarriage or abortion. Many of you have gone through these procedures. After miscarriage, after fertility treatments, after when tissues didn't quite form when you had an abortion or a pregnancy. There's all different reasons why a D&C, a clearing of the uterus tissue, is done. And now I wonder what will happen to people that need that tissue removed when their uterus is suffering and abortion is not legal. I used to think abortion procedures must take very special training, years and years. In fact, most nurses could do the procedure simply and safely with a little bit of training. I learned in the first few weeks of my abortion chaplaincy that almost everything I knew as a very well-educated UU liberal feminist woman was totally wrong. I imagined I would bring people juice and sit with them while they weighed their options. That really didn't happen. Often I sat with people who felt they didn't have any options, who felt quite desperate. And I helped as we explained to them all of the procedures that our state and federal laws require them to go through, waiting periods and education classes and all kinds of other steps when they were fully sure about what they needed for their health. I also imagined that everyone whose life was threatened by their pregnancy would be taken care of in a hospital. Aren't we told that every single day? I totally thought, like, oh my God, your life's at stake. We're taking care of this now. It's an emergency. How many of you think that? I know you're guessing because you want to be right that that's not what I'm going to say, but really, how many of you think that even before I started this? Right? I thought that. Wrong. One day I was asked to talk to a woman I'll call Serena. She had long dark hair. She was raised Catholic. She was going to law school. She had a rare arthritic disease, and she had been prescribed methotrexate. What? Methotrexate, yes. No one told her to take a pregnancy test before starting the medication, but they were emphatic that she should not become pregnant while taking the medicine. She took the medication and later learned she was pregnant, probably before she started the medicine. Her blood pressure was out of control. She was at the hospital. They told her she was at risk for a stroke. Bleeding somewhere up near Sheboygan. They said she needed to have an abortion immediately to save her life. To make matters worse, her ultrasound showed that the cells were not growing together properly, and there were probably cranial abnormalities and limb defects. On the screen, it looked like it was also having a form of some kind of seizure, if that can have a seizure at that early stage. She thought they would care for her there at the hospital. She could barely continue to form words. She was vomiting profusely. They said to go to a Planned Parenthood, the nearest one being 3 hours away. When she got to Planned Parenthood, she learned she had to wait 3 more days because Wisconsin law prevents same-day procedures. Even when your life is in danger, you will have to wait. A hospital now isn't performing an abortion when a mother's life is at stake. What do you think is going to happen when Roe is gone? They already feel harassment because they have to report procedures, and they don't want anything on their record that says anything like abortion, because otherwise they have to justify that the person's life was really at stake. And that becomes a value judgment for their doctor. Will they die now, or will they die in 5 days or a month? Serena was mostly angry about not being told to take a pregnancy test before she first took the medication. She was further enraged that the hospital did not want an abortion on their records and sent her away with her life at risk. She said to me, "I shook holding on to the wheel of my car. I had to stop and pull over and puke 3 times trying to get here. And now I spent the night in some hotel and I was shaking and I was so violently ill, I was praying I would die. My blood pressure got so bad that I went to the hospital in Milwaukee. They gave me some pills for my blood pressure and told me to get an abortion as soon as possible." Think of Serena, people like my fictitious Serena, when you hear abortion will always be allowed when a mother's life is at risk. Know that is that they won't likely to be cared for. Hospitals are so afraid of having abortion listed on their services because they are harassed so much. Imagine the incessant phone calls, the people hunting down the doctors, all of those things that happen, people showing up with guns at their doors. A friend of mine was working as a chaplain in Washington State serving Planned Parenthood. And he said there several of the hospitals had a tunnel so that if a woman's life was at risk, they could wheel her out of the hospital through the tunnel over to Planned Parenthood, give her abortion, and wheel her back. Standard practice. They built a tunnel. Once a Hindi family was in my care. They had been trying so hard to have a family. They were so cute. He was a software engineer. They had moved here from India in the last 5 years. They had this lovely 3-year-old daughter, and she kept doing little spins with her flowered dress while I was talking to them. I'm going to call the mom Sita. Sita was losing her sight from preeclampsia and blood pressure that was skyrocketing, and she too was sent away from her OBGYN's office and told to terminate her pregnancy immediately or go blind, risk stroke. I held her hand during the abortion. I whispered prayers with her as it proceeded. I rubbed essential oil, some lavender, on my hands, and I held it over her nose, and I said, breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. When she called out for God, I told her God was with her. Afterwards, Sita asked me to see the remains of her conception. I had the medical assistant place it in a bowl covered with a cloth. I asked her before showing her if she wanted to do a blessing of any sort, and she immediately asked for her husband to join her. And that really wasn't allowed to have them back in the procedure rooms. But Sita was crying and wailing, and I held her hand, and I went and got him. I made an exception. And he put his arms around her as they sat on that exam chair, and I lifted the cloth, and she looked at this tiny little blob of egg-like cells, not much different from when a robin's egg falls out of a nest. And like every single person I showed their products of conception, she immediately stopped crying. Every single time. Everyone imagines I will be showing them a miniature baby because that's what all of the right to life people do. They get little babies made. They have these miniature dolls. They pass them out. They shove them in people's hands as they're coming into the clinics. Y'all, that's not what it's like at all. It's a collection of cells, sometimes more formed, sometimes not. There's no skin. It's a gelatinous covering of some beginnings. She asked if she could touch it. I offered her a medical glove, and her husband put on the purple medical gloves, and they stroked this tiny little collection of cells. He held it out and said, "Could this be put in somebody else? Maybe somebody else could use this because we can't." And I explained it just didn't work that way, and that those very cells were harming Sita. Sita shook her head and said, thank you, God, for giving me this care." In an article I read recently in The Atlantic, author Helen Lewis explains, in the U.S., post-Roe generations of feminists have found other compelling causes to champion. They must not be afraid to make this fight a priority. They have to come back to this being worthy to fight. We have to come back. The history of the suffragette movement and other feminist movements is a history of women being told, and the men who love them and the humans who love them being told, just wait. This isn't the right time. Wait your turn. If Roe falls, this issue is one of immediate life or death. Justice Alito's logic could be used to dismantle other legal protections impacting many of us here, such as prohibiting discrimination against LGBTQ people, racism, and more. In fact, several of you wrote to me worried you would lose your same-gender marriages or that your interracial children would be in danger. Kamala Harris' statement on the Supreme Court leak used conservative language of individual rights. She said, if the right to privacy is weakened, every person could face a future in which the government can potentially interfere in personal decisions you make about your life. See, the theology of abortion varies from addressing science, ethics, the rights of the cells that have been fertilized, the rights of the person carrying the tissue, and society's right to criminalize or dictate that process. It is a misnomer to call every stage of a pregnancy prior to being able to survive outside of the womb a fetus. You'll hear me use the word prenate, which covers everything from germination, embryo, zygote, fetus, to post-viability, which doesn't occur for 22 to 26 weeks. Not to mention that at those early stages can often cost millions of dollars. Tons of resources. The chances of a premature baby's survival increase significantly with each week it remains inside the mother's uterus. Yet without advanced medicine, these super premature prenates will not survive outside of the womb. We are setting a dangerous precedent when a person is only a vessel, and the prenate has greater rights than the mother or gestational body. In those cases, the ethics to become a parent and to raise a child will not be discussed. No, we're not discussing that at all, are we? Moreover, the focus of our national conversation centers around the ethics of abortion rather than the fail rates of birth control, which increase every year you use that method. Look up fail rates of birth control. You will be amazed. The manufacturers advertise when you first get it and you're really perfect about using it absolutely the best way. It gets worse and worse. We don't discuss that. We don't discuss the society that we design to raise healthy children. No, because we don't design a society to raise healthy children. High rates of adoption in this country, that isn't what happens everywhere. In countries where there is access to great child care and wonderful housing and good health care, they don't have these rates of adoption that we do. They don't have people giving up their pregnancies the way we do. They don't have as high of rates of abortion because they have greater access to birth control. We all know that if we really cared about stopping abortion, we would provide lots of birth control, right? It's not what it's about. It's about controlling people. It's about getting the focus away from the pregnant person, their experience, their ability to make decisions about their life. If we really cared, we would offer true support through chaplaincy and actual choices. Instead, we are legislating people with uteruses as incubators. I share the following with permission. One of our UUC members, who's a transgender man, talked to me about when he found himself pregnant after a sexual assault. Knowing whether to spend more time talking about his feelings about being assaulted were really truncated because of his worries about going off his transgender hormone medication and figuring out how to stop the harm to the fetus that he'd already done. Should he be required to continue that pregnancy? He knew he did not have the means to raise the child. He worried about his mental state and how that would harm any life that carried inside of him if he was forced to carry on with that pregnancy. Focus on whether fertilized cells should be called life or not distracts us from creating a moral world to raise children in. One of you lifted up a time you had 2 babies and you thought you were pregnant. You loved your baby so much, and the idea of failed birth control resulting in a child that was a mistake felt entirely wrong to you. You knew you were not ready for another baby, and you regarded children as a gift. These are all really complex situations. Making a woman or a person with a uterus nothing but a vessel. I once went to a wedding at a conservative faith, and they called the woman the empty vessel. That robs a person of any kind of autonomy, any kind of choice about their destiny. It certainly says we don't trust you. Having a child and raising it is a moral issue that we trust people to make, even if we are not doing that ourselves, right? We need to trust people to make the best decisions for themselves. Anyone facing a moral decision deserves support and love and kindness. And if a woman or a person has no value, then whether they want to be a parent has no resonance, which is an unacceptable, even violent way to approach a woman's body and well-being. Several of you shared abortion stories with me, and you asked me to trust you made the right decision. 100% you have it. Some of you were teens when you had an abortion. Others were facing life-threatening complications and tried to continue your pregnancy anyway. One of you said, "I was so mentally unwell after carrying a dangerous pregnancy that I had to be given multiple electric shock treatments. My religion at the time told me that abortion was a sin." Well, let me tell you, after those shock treatments and time away from that new baby that I was forced to carry, I came home a new person. That new person was no longer pro-life, but instead firmly pro-choice. I knew I never should have been cajoled by my family and my faith. I never should have been forced to carry that. But why should you care? Before the 1973 passing of Roe v. Wade, it was indeed an interfaith clergy network that arranged an underground network of safe, illegal abortions for women without means to leave the country or the state to obtain abortions. The clergy consultation service on abortion had over 1,000 Protestant members and, yes, some priests and rabbis, all linking people to safe abortion providers, rides, a network, a silent, hushed network. Don't think it's not already in the works. We're going to need you. I myself was put into surgical menopause a while ago. This issue just doesn't impact me, right? In fact, when I was pregnant, it was truly an immaculate conception. I never had to have sex to get pregnant, yet this issue is mine. It is mine because my faith and my friends and my loved ones asked me to care. I trust people to make decisions. This issue calls on us to do something. Yes, you can call, sure you can march, but you can write. If you volunteer for You the Vote that is keeping this issue top of mind, almost every act of resistance with them can be done from your kitchen table. With hundreds of laws limiting abortion going into effect and now the conservative-leaning Supreme Court, we are at a really crucial time to call faith leaders to engage in not only keeping abortion safe, legal, and without restrictions, but to compassionately offer pastoral care to people needing abortion. Remember the sermon from Mother's Day on how to nurture? Go brush up, because a lot of people are going to need nurturing. The plethora of growing justification rationales for whether or not someone deserves an abortion puts the pregnant person at the center of one of the most contested medical procedures in the country. Not offering spiritual counseling, pastoral care, as well as compassion and love to people facing abortion procedures is not in the best interest of the patient, and it punishes them for becoming pregnant. Treating women like they are stupid, irresponsible, or prostitutes is unloving. It is unjust and it is immoral. Having a child is a moral decision. Raising a child and considering the access that child will have to adequate health care, education, and housing are moral decisions that are rarely ever discussed. People walk around with part of a crib. The crib is the least of their problems. Yet a living child will be raised by people without access to these is a far greater ethical issue than whether the prenate cannot survive without a womb, and should it stay in that womb. To not discuss how American society addresses health disparities, economic distress, racial injustices, limits on educational goals, and the toll taken on a family with more children than they can be prepared to raise is grossly unjust and unkind. Furthermore, it is usually women who sit at the intersection of these decisions about whether to move forward with a pregnancy, often without loving support. And I am one of only a handful of chaplains who specialize in a procedure that at least 25% of the population is having by the time they are 45. Some say that figure is as high as 35%. We need to trust people and fight like hell for abortion rights. Just because you don't need an abortion doesn't mean it isn't needed. I always think of this poem. Do you remember the poem, First They Came by Pastor Martin Niemöller? First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This is not a drill. Friends, get involved, speak out, march in the streets, write and call your legislator, shout your abortion, volunteer with Side with Love, and vote, vote, vote. But most of all, and say it with me one more time, trust people. Trust people. Trust me when I say the time is now to support people needing abortion to stay legal. That choice is yours.